Here.
Bill Palmer. Wally. Carol Jenkins. Tiffany Dubinsky.
Here.
Shannon.
Here.
Greg Thomas.
Present.
Curtis Carpinato. Ruth Emmer. Tony Chua. Don Chen.
Everyone wants you to. We'll just turn that around and mute. All right. That's very good. General administration. We have the agenda. We'll get our minutes. We'll have a motion to approve the minutes. So. Seconded. All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Next, fun part, elections, for the fiscal year 24 chair and vice chair. We typically start with chair or vice chair. I guess let's start with chair. Toss their head up the ring. Guys, make me do it for another year. You can also. I accept the nomination. Rory, will nominate you to continue your excellent work. All right, thank you. I accept. We need a second for that. I'll second it. Are there any other nominations? Anyone with any interest at all? If you need to. All right. Yes, we will call to a vote. All in favor of my election as chair? Abstain. Any opposed? All right. Congratulations to me, chair. All right. Now we vice chair, Kevin has departed the committee because he got too many promotions. And so we need someone new. Who's going to do it? Should this be someone specifically from the county? Not necessarily, but I feel like that is how it has been done probably. I mean, it's been done for quite a while now. So please, thank you. Became nominated. Very little. And we may be reviving sort of their pre-meeting a couple weeks earlier. We can talk about the agenda group meeting. Sure. I nominate Alberta. All right, we have a nomination. Do we have any other nominations? All right, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor of Alberta as vice chair? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, we honestly the one thing. Congratulations. That's our new vice chair. Yeah. We have the one regional from Cindy, who we and they can't hear us very well. Are these things one to me too?
No.
Is there anybody who can do that?
We can hear you when you're facing directly the microphone that are set out. We can hear that pretty well. It's not great, but just speak very slowly and clearly and loudly.
We'll do our best. We're gonna try plugging in these table mics. See if that helps at all.
Okay. Do you want me to go ahead and get started, or do you want me to pause for a second while you get that set up?
Can you hear us any better now?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay. Cool. Easy. All right. Well, I guess if you do you have slides or anything, Sandy?
Wait, what was that?
Do you have slides?
I do, yeah.
Is there any way we can get just main computer to show the slides? Right. Or just join the meeting. We're trying to get a big TV so everyone isn't looking over my shoulder at my tiny computer screen.
Crowd around you.
Huddle up everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just talk through the one map if you want me to go ahead and keep the meeting. Maybe I can talk through the one map. It will probably be easier to have slides for the following presentation. So
That sounds good. I guess go ahead and get started while they work on it.
okay. So we had a pretty robust discussion on one map at the previous meeting, and it made us realize that we should probably come back and talk a little bit more about the one map project and where we are. So just for your reference, the one map project is really intended to be a combined map of bicycle and pedestrian data in the MPO area, combining data from the city of Charlottesville, Albemarle County, and UVA. Into a single map resource to show the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in the region. Just to give you a little bit of project background, one map was identified as a need during the development of the Jefferson Area Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, which was completed in 2019. And so following the completion of that plan, the TJPDC was providing some general coordination with ongoing coordination of the different staff that were engaged in the bicycle and pedestrian planning, but there weren't any specific resources that were dedicated to developing the one map resource. So it kind of bounced around a little bit. Different entities picked it up here or there, but without really being identified as a specific project for on anyone's work plan, it never really quite made it to the point where it was completed and developed fully. And so in the past fiscal year, in the 2023 fiscal year, the MPO identified it and dedicated specific resources to complete the one map resource in the 2023 fiscal year. So just to clarify a few things about one map, about what one map is and what one map is not. One map is intended to be a resource of regional bike ped transportation data in order to support an understanding of the existing system infrastructure and for use as a planning tool. We are pulling together data that is provided by UVA, the city of Charlottesville, and Albemarle County into a single data set, and we're making this data available for public use. What we are not doing with one map at this juncture is incorporating any trails data that is not considered a transportation improvement. So that was very specific in order to manage the scope of the project. We wanted this to focus on what is considered a transportation project, and if you have questions about that, I'm happy to elaborate a little bit on what is considered transportation versus recreational. We are not incorporating data for trails that are not publicly maintained. So there was a discussion about how to bring in information for maybe recreational uses that are maybe on private properties. We're not including that as part of this resource. And we are not incorporating planned improvements at this point. So we are only looking at existing infrastructure, and we'll update the map as new infrastructure is added to the bicycle and pedestrian network. So there are a couple of different project challenges that we face as we were trying to navigate through this project. And one of the biggest things that we wanted to avoid doing in the development of the one map resource was duplicating the maintenance and ongoing sort of update and collection of information. We wanted to make sure that there were not overlapping data sets that were being maintained in different ways by different entities for the sake of providing a clarification on the accuracy of the information. So there were also some differences in how the different organizations that are involved in OneMap were characterizing or entering the data into the GIS system. So some of those involved whether or not the attributes that were being put into GIS followed the center line of the road versus the actual physical location of the infrastructure. Whether they were being entered in as line segments versus polygons. That was a difference that we noticed. And so we had some discussions about how important it was to standardize how that information was maintained. Again, going back to the first premise, which is that we wanted to make sure that we were not duplicating and trying to maintain different data sets for the same information. The solution that we identified as a staff is that the simplest way to overcome those obstacles was just to let all the entities continue to collect and enter the data the way that made sense for them. And at this specific point in the project, we're just going to combine it and share it back out as it is provided to us, not necessarily try to adjust or revise how the data is entered, or I don't know I'm not the GIS person, but how the data is digitized. So another challenge that we were faced with is that there is an overlapping effort with VDOT to maintain bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure data on a statewide basis. The state is actively collecting this information, and David Cook, who is on the call today, is working to maintain a statewide resource of this information. There are some differences between what the state is collecting versus what we have identified locally as the information we want to share on this map. Specifically, the state is limiting the type of infrastructure that they are including on their statewide map if it is providing internal access to a specific resource. So for example, if it's a resource that loops around the university or that loops around a park that doesn't necessarily provide external access outside of that locational resource, that is not being incorporated into the state's bicycle infrastructure inventory. And so there is some additional information that we're probably going to be maintaining outside of what VDOT is maintaining. And then VDOT is also not maintaining the sidewalk information. And so the solution there is basically that we will continue to work with VDOT and sort of let VDOT be the main source of the information that is within the scope of the work that they're doing to maintain the information on the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure based on what their scope is. And then we will continue to work to coordinate any new infrastructure that is identified that meets those standards with VDOT to help them maintain their information in an up-to-date way. And then we will regularly pull that information and combine it with the additional local information that we want to make available to our region. And then the third thing that I've been talking about is the need to identify a systemic methodology to maintain and provide updates to the data. And so basically, I think this is a close enough community that if there are new infrastructure projects that are being installed, we'll have a pretty good opportunity to be aware of those early. But because there's not an overwhelming amount of those, and just to make sure that we're creating a sustainable system to keep this as an up-to-date resource, we'll develop a regular schedule to update the data, probably on an either annual or biannual basis. We'll kind of see how that plays out. So just to give you all a little bit of a final preview of what the expectation is as far as the resources that will be available. We are going to host the information on the TJPDC website. I'll send a link in just a second. The combined data set is not available just yet, but we're working on getting the actual data set itself loaded up to the website. We do have a regional reference map that has been developed as a PDF, and we are looking into getting that formatted in like an ArcGIS online type of format, the things that you can kind of click on, you see the map, you can kind of zoom in and out and explore it a little bit more. It's a little bit more interactive. So we're working on that. And then we're also sharing the links to the reference data where we're pulling the information as available. I don't think the data we got from UVA is from a publicly available resource, but the other resources are there to give some additional information to anybody that wants to explore it a little bit further. So with that, I'm going to drop a link to the website, and you can go to that at your leisure to look through the resources. But mostly just wanted to let you know that the One Map project is largely completed, at least as determined was appropriate for this first phase, and any additional work we do related to the bike ped planning can draw on that as a resource now that we have sort of all that information in one place. Any questions? Or Ryan, is there anything you want to add to that discussion, or Ruth?
No.
Thank you.
So I've got one question about the public-private split. So I know there's a few places where you have privately owned facilities, really recreational and more just sometimes very short links between streets that don't connect. The one I'm thinking of here is where Johnson Village and that Cherry Hill PUD meet. There's a little route that's probably 30 feet long, where if you don't go down there, you'll have to go way out of your way to get to primary. And would those things be captured at all, or would it be not able to get this?
It's probably something we would look at in context. So I think this gives us a good resource of what the existing infrastructure is. And I think, again, as we start looking at proposed improvements and what our goals are for the connectivity of the network and things like that, we're gonna have to look at each of those areas in context. So I don't know that those necessarily need to be captured on the map. I think the map gives us enough information where we know where the assets are, and we can use that to provide sort of a baseline context, but also understanding that that's not telling us the full story.
Sandy, I had a question about the state's map. You mentioned that they will not be maintaining sidewalk layers. They'll be showing a sidewalk layer, right? They're just depending on localities for that information, not updating themselves, or.
Yeah, I'm not going to put, well, David Cook is on the call. When I looked at the map, I didn't see sidewalk listed as one of the the data layers, but David, if you're on the call and want to provide clarification.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sandy. David Cook. I'm with TMPD, Statewide Bicycle and Pedestrian Planner. So we do have a sidewalk inventory. Right now, we're actually in the middle of a big update of our bike inventory map, and that map should be completed at the end of July. We have some edits going on, some additional features that needed to be added to the map. We're also going to spin that up to the VDOT enterprise service, so it'll be available on Virginia roads. We're probably going to have to update the link on that map. So Sandy, remind me, just because I noticed on your one map, you do have the link on there. So we'll have a brand new link in August. So just let me know. But in reference to your question, we do have a sidewalk inventory. It's about 93% complete. So we're missing 10 local governments. Basically, that was based on data provided us from MPOs, PDCs, local governments, from their records. And there's about 10 localities in there that we still need to work on. So that's going to be the next big effort starting in August. We do plan to show a map similar to the bike inventory map that'll kind of be a one kind of snapshot of all of the data that's been given to us on the pedestrian sidewalk infrastructure. But we will have to go in and actually digitize those 10 local governments. So it'll probably be towards the end of the year before we actually make that publicly available. But we do have that data. I can send over a shape file to the MPO if they would like to see that, what we have so far. But basically it is incomplete, and we'll keep you in the loop as we move along.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions? Michael?
Sandy, you mentioned the planning effort to put into this thing would be something that would come in at a later date. Do you have any idea when we might work towards that?
No, I don't think we have set plans for what the next steps are going to be for the planning effort. We wanted to develop this as a resource for both, you know, the MPO as well as any of the localities. We have a couple of other big projects we're working on right now. So anything specifically for the bike ped project would not be in this next fiscal year, or not this current fiscal year that we're just starting, but would be at the earliest next fiscal year.
Thank you.
But I do think this is information that we can incorporate into our other planning efforts, like the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, the you know, the long range transportation plan. This does give us some good information to use in other non-bike ped specific projects.
All right, anything else? Not, let's move on to moving towards community.
Yeah, is the is there
Up there, so feel free to share,
okay.
assuming we let you do that.
Yeah, hold on. All right, so this is a pretty lengthy discussion, and one of the things I want to let you all know is I don't think it got caught on the agenda, but I'm going to, because I want to make sure that everybody is aware of the discussions that are happening at the CTB, I'm going to limit what we're talking about for the long range transportation plan a little bit more than I had planned initially, and we'll plan to have a much more substantive conversation about that next month. So just to clarify, is the next agenda item the public or the long range transportation plan updates?
Yeah, number 5 is long range transportation plan, and then number 6 is your smart scale update. And we've got well, we had 20 minutes for LRTD and 40 minutes for smart scale, and we're currently running 13 minutes late. So
okay, well, I'll condense this a little bit, but I just wanted to give you all an overview, let you know what's happening as far as the public engagement, where we are now, what our next steps are. So we can keep this pretty brief unless you all have really significant questions you want us to dive into. So just to give you an overview, we started the public engagement formally with the stakeholder committee meetings that met in February, and then we really launched to the more broad public engagement in June. So at that first set of stakeholder committee meetings, we held 3 meetings. We had 25 attendees, and they gave us feedback on the goals and objectives. They were more facilitated conversations, and we had less specific questions we were trying to get information on out of those stakeholder committee meetings. We had a pretty low participation in the first set of meetings that the MPO developed. We had 4 attendees at the virtual informational webinar, and then at the drop-in open house, we had 6 attendees. And while those numbers are low, I would say that that's not necessarily out of the ordinary for what is occurring at other types of public engagement along those lines. So really what this means is that our best opportunities to get the feedback we're looking for at this phase is to really try to get out into the community and work with specific organizations. I checked it late last night. I have not checked it today, but the MetroQuest survey was at 114 responses. When I put the slide together, I think it's up to over 120 now. So we are getting some feedback. Yeah, I mean, it's not an overwhelming amount, but people are seeing the survey and taking it. So we are getting some of that feedback. All right. So in terms of getting additional information, the biggest piece of information that is going to be really helpful for us as part of this is that we do want some general feedback on the overall different priorities related to the goals that we're seeking information on, but we're really hoping to get information from the public on where the transportation system is not working well for them or where they see opportunities for improvement. So it's really, if you've taken the MetroQuest survey, it's really those mapping comments that are going to help us understand what is important to the public as we move into the next phase. And then the first questions regarding the different weighting for the priorities and the trade-offs, that's going to help us sort of understand the relative importance of the different priorities comparatively, but the map is going to give us the richest set of information. So we do have a couple of intercepts that are being planned. I think next week actually we'll be tabling at the Downtown Transit Center, so that will give us some good opportunities to hear from specifically transit riders. We're working with the center at Belvedere to do some outreach. We are attending a board meeting with the Charlottesville-Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau. And then while it's outside of probably this specific engagement phase, we are working with Albemarle County to also attend community advisory committee meetings, and they have some plans specifically focused around transportation. So we'll adapt our engagement with them based on where exactly we are with the phasing of the project. We're also exploring some opportunities to get some additional outreach, looking at maybe trying to table at the national night out events. I haven't been able to get in touch with any of the event coordinators just yet, but that's something that we're actively working on. Looking at potentially tabling it Fridays after 5. I've been trying to get in touch with CRHA to work with them, and then also trying to work with UVA to table at the lawn once the students come back for the session. And then there are also some opportunities to work with specific neighborhood organizations that we're also reaching out. So the other thing that I'll mention is that at this point, where we are in the process is largely conceptual. So I think we're also going to have another opportunity to get feedback from the public when we start talking about specific projects that we're looking at. And that's likely where people will start having more of a personal understanding of how this could impact them. And that's another opportunity for us to be hearing from the public. So, our engagement goals, I think were to reach about 600 to 700 people, to try to make sure that we were reaching a good cross-section that was representative of the community. And so we're going to continue to work towards those goals, also understanding that it won't necessarily all need to occur upfront in this particular phase. And then just to give you a little preview of what we're hearing so far from the survey, when asked about how much to weight the different goals that have been presented between safety, environmental considerations, multimodal accessibility, land use coordination, and efficiency and economic development, you can see that the highest priority has been given to safety, followed by the environment and multimodal accessibility. And then the land use coordination, and then the efficiency considerations were the lowest. Regarding the trade-offs, I think this probably confirmed what we've already seen in a lot of other plans, but I think it's helpful to have this information. So we were asking the survey respondents to make trade-off, forcing them to make choices between two competing interests. So the first one was, would you prefer we prioritize roadway improvements or prioritize multimodal improvements? And you can see that there's a strong preference for prioritizing multimodal improvements over roadway improvements. When asked about access, one of the items we're trying to capture here is as a more important, less important, same amount of importance to improve access to jobs, or to improve access to community destinations that aren't necessarily associated with employment. And this one is a little bit more equally spread. There might be a slight preference towards access to jobs, but you can see that the highest number of respondents are selecting that middle category, meaning that it's really important to consider both of those accessibility issues. And then the final one was related to climate action. Is there a preference between trying to reduce congestion on the roadways versus supporting active transportation to try to get people off of the roadways and using alternative forms of transportation? And you can see that there's a strong preference for the active transportation and public transportation. So So that's just a little bit of a preview of what we're hearing so far. We're going to continue to reach out to specific groups to identify opportunities for outreach, especially looking at underserved communities and how we can increase engagement in the plan with those communities. And then, like I said previously, we're anticipating more engagement once we begin the discussions of the specific transportation improvements that are being considered. Any questions on the public engagement so far?
Keep going.
Sorry, we haven't had questions from the room.
What's that?
No. We don't have any questions here.
Okay, great.
Any better? If I do this, can you hear me better?
Okay, it's a little in and out.
Oh, okay. Pretty much the best I can do, sorry. We can hear you, but so keep going.
Do you want me to move forward to the next presentation then?
Sandy, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Let me switch back.
Do you hear from the middle of the room?
It's just very fuzzy everywhere.
Oh. How about this?
That feels a little bit better.
All right, we're back on the owl now.
Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and talk about the conversations regarding smart scale at the CTB meeting. And what I want to preface all of this with is that these discussions are ongoing. So I think that's important to know that no decisions have been made yet. And there's actually a smart scale retreat that is occurring tomorrow. And so the CTB is going to get into more discussions on this tomorrow. And also the other thing that I want to make sure that you are aware of is that this is condensing hours of presentations that the CTB has made at the May and June meetings. So this is certainly intended to provide you all with information to help you understand maybe what some of the concerns are related with how the smart scale program is currently functioning and some of the feedback that the CTB is hearing and some of the options that they might have to make adjustments to the smart scale program. But I am not an expert on any of this. And so this is presented mostly for you all to be aware that the discussions are happening. But if there's something you need more information on, I would certainly encourage you to watch the CTB meetings, tune in to the retreat tomorrow if you're able to, because this is an ongoing discussion. And certainly happy to have conversations with VDOT and any of you if needed to get clarification on what potential outcomes might be from some of the changes that they're considering. So the first thing that I'll start with is that if you are a little less familiar with Smart Scale, they did a really good job at the May Commonwealth Transportation Board meeting covering the history of the program, what is codified, so what is not subject to adjustments or changes year by year for Smart Scale, and what the CTB has some discretion over in terms of how they adjust how the program is implemented between years. Between every single round of Smart Scale, there's an evaluation of the project outcomes. And so between rounds 4 or after round 5, they're going through the same evaluation. The evaluation considered surveys that were sent out to external users, so people who are submitting applications like localities and MPOs, interviews with CTB members, feedback from the state agency staff and consultants that are involved with the application development and scoring. And so a lot of the feedback is based on what they're hearing across all of these different feedback mechanisms. The potential adjustments that they are considering address both procedural concerns as well as project funding outcomes. And then, like I said, the discussions are ongoing. Just to give you a really high level background of smart scale so we can sort of set the stage, there are different land use types. So every locality, every region within the state is sorted into one of these land use types. And based on the land use type, that determines how much of your score is derived from the different scoring factors up here. So the Charlottesville-Albemarle area, MPO area, is a type B land use type. And one of the main factors that has set the one of the main factors is what percentage of the score is derived from land use. It wasn't until round 5 that land use was added to type C and D. Previously, just types A and B were able to get some of their benefit score from the land use factor. And then everywhere in our construction district or within our region outside of the Charlottesville-Albemarle MPO boundaries is considered type C. So it has a different scoring that's applied. And then there are 2 funding programs through Smart Scale. There's the district grant program and there's the high priority program. So the district grant program is funding that is allocated directly to each of the VDOT construction districts. And localities are the only applicants that are eligible to receive funding through the district grant program. And the qualifying types of projects that localities can submit under the district grant program include safety, urban development area projects, projects on corridors of statewide significance, and projects on a regional network. And then there's the second program is the high priority program. And so every entity that is eligible to submit smart scale projects can submit projects to the high priority program. But the high priority program is the only program that MPOs, PDCs, and transit agencies are able to submit applications through. So we do not qualify to submit projects through the district grant program. And then the projects that are eligible to receive funding through the high priority program are limited to projects on corridors of statewide significance and regional network projects, which are basically defined within the MPO travel markets by the Commonwealth Transportation Board. That's just some background information. So the OIP staff, which oversees the Smart Scale program, basically completed an analysis of the project after round 5 and identified a number of issues that they wanted to examine further in order to better understand whether or not Smart Scale was meeting the intended purpose of the program and to determine if they wanted to make any adjustments. So you'll see that what's in red here are concerns or identified issues, as they're referring them, that have not yet been addressed. Those are going to be discussed at the Smart Scale retreat, which starts tomorrow. So what they've talked about so far has been the actual project development and application development and the quality of applications that are being received, real or perceived process biases. I don't recall specifically looking at forward-looking process, but I think that might also be something that is embedded into another process that may be discussed further. And then the funding steps. And so I'm just going to very briefly highlight what those discussions are and what some of the potential adjustments they're considering could be and what those could mean for projects in our region. All right, so the first issue that they talked about was the application quality. And one of the things they're highlighting is how much additional resource it takes in order to prepare smart scale applications compared to when the project was originally, or the program was originally enacted. Basically, the program is 50% bigger funding-wise through the 6-year improvement program, but it's the same amount of staff that is on board to develop the applications, score the projects, and then also implement the projects. And so when they reviewed what they were receiving through the Smart Scale process, what they found is that over 50% of submitted applications were not ready for scoring at the full application submission. And they found that 413 applications were received with 152 recommended for funding. So the success rate of applications that were submitted was a little over a third. That entities that submitted more applications were not necessarily more successful at getting projects funded, and that basically overwhelming, they heard that there was a lot of time and effort that was being spent on preparing these applications that were ultimately not competitive for the funding program. So a couple of potential solutions that are being discussed is reducing the number of application caps for all entities. So what this means is that for entities of our size, we each are able to submit 5 pre-applications and 4 final applications. There's a discussion about reducing the overall total number of caps that all entities would be able to submit in order to support the improved quality of the applications, so that applications that are submitted have all the information that are needed at the project deadline, and also to make sure that there's good attention being given to developing quality projects. There's some other considerations regarding readiness. So for any entity that wants to locally administer their own projects, there's a discussion about whether or not they would want to continue to allow entities to use their own estimates if they agree to cover any shortfall versus maybe requiring them that they use a VDOT validated estimate. There's a discussion around that. And then there's also a discussion around potentially tying funding decisions to past performance and project delivery for any locally administered projects. And so you can see that this is showing, so again, we're the smaller tier, we're tier 1. So you can see that right now, this is our maximum number of pre-applications, and there are a couple of options that are being presented to reduce the total number of applications to either 3 final applications or 2 final applications. There is a technical, for everything that they're doing, they're analyzing what it might look like if they implement that solution. And so you can see the application numbers fell from 394 to 259, but the success rate increased from 39% to 53%. And then one of the things they're talking a lot about is the size of the projects that are getting funded, and so they're also looking at how the value of the project might change with all of the adjustments that they're making. So that's this is the first sort of set of issues that they're tackling, is the application quality. So there's a technical work group that is meeting to review the potential adjustments and to make recommendations. And so the work group recommended reducing the application cap. They recommended that they provide earlier and targeted support to applications, so improving the overall quality of the applications that are being submitted. And then they do not support the solution to not validate estimates. They want all the estimates to come through to go through the VDOT validation process. And they also recommend the solution to tie consensus funding decisions to performance and delivering projects. I can keep going, or I can kind of pause at the end of each section to take questions, but for the sake of time, it might help to just keep going through. Is that okay with you, Rory?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So the next thing they spent a lot of time talking about is looking at the perceived biases in the projects that were recommended for funding, specifically focusing on small projects being funded at a higher rate than bigger projects. So they asked the external responders to the survey, do you think there's a bias in their process? And what they heard back is almost 60% said, yes, we think the project is biased either between large and small projects, urban, rural projects, based on project mode, etc. So being good engineers, they did an analysis and they defined some terms. So when they're talking about small projects, they're talking about projects that are under $10 million in value. And then they did some analysis, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think it makes sense that you're going to fund smaller projects for less amount of money so you'll get a higher number of small projects, but it will take up a smaller portion of the budget because they're small by nature versus the number of large projects that are funded. So one of the things they looked at is how many small projects are being funded through the high priority program. So that's the program that is intended to fund projects that either are on corridors of statewide significance or on regional networks. This is important because one of the biases that they're looking at is that there's concern that these high priority program funds are funding small projects that aren't necessarily having the impacts that were intended to be funding through the high priority program. So this graph on the left shows the breakdown between funding for projects that are in the district grant program between large and small projects. And then this column on the left shows the breakdown of large versus small projects in the high priority program. And what they really focused on is this jump between round 3 and round 4 to the number of small projects that were being funded through the high priority program. So there is a larger number of smaller projects that are being funded through the high priority program in rounds 4 and 5 compared to rounds 1, 2, and 3. Right. And specifically, they looked at the breakdown then between small projects that were bike ped principal improvement projects and highway principal improvement projects. And what they found is that for small projects, comparing small project to small project, what they found is that bike ped projects were 59% successful versus highway projects that had a success rate of 47%. So the success rate for bike ped projects was a little bit higher. So small projects are funded at just over twice more often than large projects. Small bike ped projects specifically were more successful. And small projects account for 78% in project count, but 33% of total funded amount. The average smart scale request has decreased between rounds 1 and 4. So this is reflecting that probably applicants are adjusting the types of projects that they're submitting to be competitive in smart scale. And so what that's doing is that's leading to a higher number of smaller projects that are being submitted in order to be competitive. And that bike ped projects have steadily increased from rounds 1 to specifically rounds 4 and 5. So the next thing they talked about is the amount of influence that the land use factor score has played in the overall amount of benefits that projects receive. And there's some concern that the land use score is driving which projects are getting funded to an extent that maybe I guess a little more outweighed than they intended it to be. So this starts getting into some of the discussions and the caveats that they're talking about as they're talking about making these adjustments, and that it's complicated. There are a lot of different changes they can make, and changes to one thing might have some cascading impacts on other factors. And so part of what they're doing at the Smart Scale Retreat is talking about what happens when you start layering some of these potential adjustments on top of each other and what that does to the outcomes. But I still want to make sure that you all are aware of these discussions that are occurring. All right, so what they're finding is that the overall amount of the benefit score that projects are receiving has increased almost doubled since round 1, or more than doubled since round 1. So at round 1, you can look right here. At round 1, land use benefit score accounted for 23% of the total benefit score that projects received, and then in round 5, it's up to 49%. All right, and specifically, as you start talking about smaller projects, the smaller the project, the higher percentage of the benefit score is coming from land use. So for projects under 10 million, 55% of the benefit score was coming from land use. For projects between 10 and 20 million, 43% was coming from land use. And then 20 to 30 million, 32% was coming from land use. And specifically, bike ped projects are getting a very significant amount of their benefit score from the land use category. And so you can see that the overall average was 49%, but for bike ped projects, it's 74%. and then for bus transit, it's 64%. So those active transportation and public transportation, alternative transportation, are getting a high amount of their benefit score from land use. All right. So this is really talking about why maybe they want to look at whether or not the land use score is really capturing what they want it to capture in terms of providing overall project benefits. The land use score is really capturing currently in their assessment is capturing more where a project is being located and not actually whether or not it is having significant improvements to the land use efficiency goals that are stated in the CTP's goals. And so one of the things that they are talking about doing is that they think land use is important. They want to keep it. They want to keep, sort of a benefit from land use, but tying that maybe more to enhancing the benefits that are identified from other scoring factors. So for example, you might get a safety score, and then if there's a high land use benefit, you wouldn't get a separate score for land use. You would potentially get a additional magnifier that is applied to your scores in other areas. So that's one potential adjustment that they're talking about. And the goal there is to limit the influence that land use has and remove land use from being the sole driver of success for which projects are identified for funding. All right, and so again, they're doing these scenarios. And so what you can see is that if they made some adjustments, and again, I don't know the actual details of what kind of maybe like influence factor they might be using, but it shows that if they basically make some of the proposed modifications to land use that they're discussing, this would be the impact. The average total cost of funded projects would increase a little bit. The average total requests of funded projects would be raised, so you're getting slightly larger projects. And you can see where there would be changes based on the improvement type. So there would be fewer bike ped projects that were funded, a few more highway projects, and maybe some minor changes to the bus or transit projects that are funded. All right. The other thing that they're talking about doing right now is making some adjustments to what types of projects are eligible through the high priority program funding. So currently, the Code of Virginia that enables the smart scale legislation basically says that high priority projects are intended to mean those projects that are of regional or statewide significance, such as projects that reduce congestion, increase safety, accessibility, environmental quality, or economic development. The current policy defines where the projects are located, and so there's some discussion about whether or not there's a need to better define what types of projects should be eligible through the high priority program. So one definition that is being considered is that high priority projects would be limited to new capacity highway projects, managed lanes, new or improved interchanges, new or improved passenger rail stations, and freight rail improvements, or fixed guideway transit. So remember that the MPO, the PDC transit agencies are only eligible to submit projects through the high priority program. So this would limit the types of applications that we would be able to submit to projects that meet this or another proposed guideline for what types of projects would be eligible through the high priority program. So just thinking through this in terms of what that might look like as far as developing our project applications, if they adopted the definition that they are considering as presented at this point.
Sandy, can I for a second?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us at all?
Yes.
We got a question from Ben.
Yeah, just on the last slide, can you go back to the previous slide of what types are we showing that they're cutting out types that are currently allowed?
Currently,
That looks like
currently there's no definition for the types of projects. So as long as the project meets a VTrans need on a corridor of statewide significance or on a regional network need in VTrans, it would be eligible through the high priority program.
Okay, so between this and the previous changes that you were looking at for land use, it looks like there's sort of an overall thrust to deprioritize bike ped projects. Is that safe to say?
I think there's a lot of concern about the amount of, I think there's a lot of concern of whether or not that was the intended outcome of the Smart Scale program, and is certainly a direction where Smart Scale has been shifting in recent rounds. Yes.
Okay. I think we might have the opposite concern here, that we're getting that funding taken away from projects that we think are important for bike ped projects. So I'm a little bit like freaking out that we're taking that away. Something we might want to provide feedback to the state on.
And do you know what's like driving this push or concern at VDOT or on the CTB? Is it, you know, the administration? Is it the whole 64 gap, people being mad that wasn't funded sooner? Why are they so worried about bike ped?
Sandy, I can, in listening, and again, I think we're gonna hear a lot more after this retreat, but in listening to the previous CPB meetings, I think there's a lot of variables. I think part of it was the capacity of VDOT staff to be reviewing the quantity of applications that are coming in and making sure that the quality of those applications improve. I think there also has been a de-emphasis at the administrative level, and specifically looking at benefit cost analysis and how we're measuring that on multimodal project versus roadway project. I think there's a lot of different things. I also think that it is best practice that they review it every several years and say, are the intended outcomes happening for what the project was designed to do? So this is kind of like in that rotation of, it's been several rounds, let's go back and do an analysis of the entire program.
Yeah, you do that analysis everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
The other issue though is what we're talking about is the intended outcome. The intended outcome was to depoliticize the process for picking projects. If that means, oops, we end up with bike ped projects, that's what we end up with. And if we're saying the intention was never to do bike ped projects, then we're totally changing the conversation actually was.
And I think in doing this analysis, there are also one of the bullets on one of the slides that they spent some time in discussion over was that people are learning the process well enough that they are now submitting applications based on what they think will score well, not necessarily what are the highest priority. For example, if there's a very large cost interchange, they may not do that one because they know that it's not going to be competitive. So they're also trying to address, folks learning the system and submitting applications that fit the system and seeing is there a need to change the system so that those higher priority things become more competitive. That was just a large discussion that they had. It was only one bullet, but they spent some time on it.
Okay. Before we jump into the list of our regional projects, the other thing that sort of gave me pause was the past performance issue. Do we know any more details on that? Because I don't think the city's going to do quite well if we're competing with other people.
I have not heard.
Okay. So that might be something they're talking about in their workshop. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
if you're able to tune in tomorrow, I would certainly suggest doing so. And
Yep.
then or follow the recording as soon as it's available. I think I'm not sure that there's going to be a formal opportunity to submit comments or feedback, but I certainly want to make sure that we're all aware that this conversation is happening in order to be thinking through what the implications would be to our region and localities.
There are the retreat.
Yeah, through CT, you want us to send it to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on, yeah. I think also, one of the things I talked to Sandy about is one of the reasons we're going to be continuing to update you guys on these conversations and CTV is having is it may be that we ask or recommend the policy board to write an official letter with a position on, what we feel is necessary in order to get regional priorities addressed. So we're certainly going to be paying attention to it, but we think lots of eyes on this discussion is pretty important because there could be some significant changes that have a large impact.
And do we, or would it be worthwhile, I guess, to like engage our local CTV member directly? Here's our police captain. I don't know if we have contact with him generally, but
Yeah, we've got with him.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Or who is it? Buyer, something, right?
Yeah, Daryl Byers. We can it's probably going to make more sense to wait until after the retreat to sort of see where the discussions, what direction the discussions are going. But yeah, we can certainly consider that as a conversation we want to have. There's actually a couple more. I was trying to put this in context of sort of our region, so there are a couple more related to what the CTB is doing. But I think basically, I wanted to sort of give at least some high level idea or context for what that might look like as far as impacts for our region. So I'll put it in context of our project. I think the biggest takeaway though right now is that it may be too early to really settle on which projects we want to be preparing for applications until after they determine which of these adjustments they may be making, if any of them. So based just on this proposed definition for what kinds of projects would be eligible for the high priority program funds, I went through all of our projects. For the projects that were submitted previously, I looked at what kinds of improvements those were. This has not been vetted through VDOT. This has not been validated. This is my assessment. So it could be that I have misinterpreted some of these, but the projects that appear to be able to meet those definitions that are on the list of potential projects we could consider would be the Ravenna River Bike Ped Bridge. So even though there's a movement to move away from some of these bike ped projects, this primary improvement type through the Smart Scale application was actually a highway new capacity project. So that could potentially still be an eligible project that we're able to submit. It's a new bridge, so the new bridge sort of overrides the bicycle and pedestrian improvement as far as what is considered the principal improvement type. The other thing I probably did not emphasize is that there's nothing that would prohibit you or us from including any sort of bike ped or multimodal improvements as part of another application that met this definition. It's just that the principal improvement type would have to start with one of those categories. And if we had other multimodal improvements we wanted to incorporate, we could do that as well. So the Ravenna River Bike Ped Bridge, I believe, would still be an eligible project. The Hillsdale South Extension, I believe, would be an eligible project because it's new capacity. It's building a new road connection. And then potentially the pipeline project at Ivy Road is also including potentially a review of the 250 interchange. And so if there's a potential interchange improvement, that could be an eligible project through the high priority program. I don't believe any of the other projects would meet that definition that's being considered right now, though.
So for 250 barracks, is it just that we weren't planning on making any significant changes to that interchange as part of that?
I don't think the interchange is part of the project scope. Michael's going to talk about that in a minute. Maybe he can clarify.
Okay.
Yeah. So the last thing that they're talking about potentially reviewing is the way that projects are funded. So the current process to fund projects through Smart Scale is step one looks at all the projects that were submitted through the district grant program. So just looking at each of the construction districts, projects are scored. And then funding is allocated to projects within those construction districts based on who gets the highest score until they run out of money. The second step allocates the high priority program funds on a district-wide basis. So it basically looks at the project scores and says which projects would be funded in each district if they had been eligible to be submitted to the district grant program versus the high priority program. So that's step two. And then step three allocates the high priority program funds on a statewide basis. So looking at if there's any funding left, what are the highest overall statewide projects? And they'll go through and fund those until they run out of money. So one of the concerns that they're looking at right now is that the amount of funding allocation to the high priority program has not increased since round two. But when the wholesale fuels tax was enacted in 2020, all of that funding was allocated to the district grant program. So there's now a lot more funding in the district grant program than there was previously. And so I think the concern that they're trying to address here is that they are continuing to allocate high priority program funds to projects that are really these small projects that are more appropriate for the district grant program, even though the district grant program has more resources than it did when it started. And so just to, again, give you some context, when you look at the projects in the Culpeper district, these are the projects over here that shows like where the project is funded as far as the funding steps. So the projects that are in each of the localities that are submitted by the localities are funded in that step 1. And then the projects that were recommended for approval, this is looking at the staff recommended scenario, not the final scenario. But the projects that were recommended for approval that were submitted by the MPO and the PDC are being funded in step 2. So that's just what that looks like to play out. We don't have any projects that were funded in our region that were funded through that next step, step 3. So what they did was they looked at what would happen if they changed the high priority program definition. And what they found is that if they just changed the definition for what types of projects are eligible through the high priority program, they found that the average project size increased from $15.6 million to $76.2 million. And the number of projects that were funded decreased from 30 projects to 6 projects. And what they found is that any projects that were the bike ped principal improvement types were not funded through the high priority program. So you can see the bike ped projects that were funded were all funded through the district program in this scenario. None of those projects were funded through the high priority program. All right. So then they did this analysis on what happens if they eliminate that step 2 funding. So basically, instead of that second step being that projects would be allocated, the high priority projects would be approved or recommended for funding based on if they would have been recommended for funding through the district grant program if they were eligible. Instead of doing that, they're saying, let's remove that step and let's go immediately from step 1, prioritize all the projects within the construction district. And then the new step 2 would be prioritize all the projects across the state through the high priority program fund. And what they found when they did that is that it actually reduced the overall size of the projects that were funded. So changing the definition of the high priority program decreased the number of projects, increased the value of the projects that were funded, and decreased the number of projects that were funded. Making changes to change the funding steps actually had the opposite effect, where it decreased the total value of the projects, the average value of the projects, and increased the total number of projects that were funded. So you can see we are increasing the number of bike ped projects, we're increasing the number of highway projects. And so then they looked at combining those two. So those two are having kind of conflicting impacts. One of them is reducing the project size, the other one's increasing the project size. So they combined those. And what they saw is that when they combined those two scenarios, that had a more moderated impact. It increased the project size. So they're funding what they would consider to be more of these significant improvements to the corridors of statewide significance and regional network. It increased the overall project size, decreased the number of projects by about half. And then it decreased the number of bicycle and pedestrian primary projects from 51 to 15. So again, we're looking at potentially what this might have on our projects, but I think the main takeaways is there are a lot of things that they're talking about that are going to significantly change the types of projects that we may be eligible to submit, that could change the types of projects that are really being prioritized through the investment of this high priority program funding. And so I think it's really important, again, that we're just paying attention, following the conversation, considering whether or not this is having impacts that are overall helpful for our region, or maybe have some concerns that we want to make sure are being at least heard as part of the process. But I think at this point, until we sort of get a better sense of direction from the CTB, it's going to be hard to know what direction to go as far as our application development. So any other questions on this? That's a lot of information, and it's just sort of barely scratching the surface.
In the retreat, that's something that, Nelson shared, is they have looked at each of these things in isolation. Part of the retreat is to look at what happens in all of that in process. Looking at how they define projects, how they score the projects, how they weight the projects, the number of applications that are received. So now we're really gonna get in and kind of push up the and see what are the impacts of some of these changes that they're considering. No question?
All right, I think that's it. Ready to go to the next item, which is federal grant update. No, it is VDOT pipeline project. Oh, or no, it is round six project development. Sorry.
I think
Whole
I think we
purpose.
I think we wrap this together.
Off the pipeline projects. Project pipeline, so the second round of project pipeline to VDOT has initiated. Project pipeline is basically a means to really develop better concepts, better estimates, create better applications. I think we found, and you sort of see that embedded in the argument, the process there. Having projects that are fully conceived when they come into the application stage, these projects that tend to be over budget and delayed, and trying to better define what these projects are for the application stage for pipelines, really geared towards that. Moreover, it is based on the V-Trans needs, priority 1, priority 2 needs, where we start the project. You know, as inside of the district, we're also trying to help support other projects, because the project selection process, the last round, cap and revenue sharing projects didn't work for very many people in this PDC. We did work for Green County, most of them working with section of the district. Be good to try and branch out and sort of work on that on these other projects, whether they're smart scale or revenue sharing or tap. With that said, again, project pipelines focus on these high priority V-Trans projects. We're doing 4 currently in the district right now. One's in Culpeper, one's in Warrenton, and 2 of them are here in the Charlotte area, Barracks Road and the Abbey corridor we're looking at. And the process, you know, as you all know, Chuck's daughter has been sick and actually passed away a couple weeks back. That meant that he was managing these projects. I took him over about 5 or 6 weeks ago. So I've been playing a lot of catch up myself on these projects. To be quite honest with you, we're probably about a month behind where we thought we should be in the process. Pipeline is broken into 3 phases, and I think we can catch up in this phase, if not the next phase, but to be on the timeline. Basically, first project phase runs towards the end of September. The next one will run from September to December, and then the last one will be January to July of next year. And if you think about the 3 phases, that simply put, first phase is defining what the problem is. Second phase is trying to figure out what are potential solutions and trying to work with those to try and find a preferred solution. And then the third phase is really trying to engineer that at a conceptual level. Well, maybe a little bit more at a conceptual level, but just trying to get some really good application plan together, a good estimate. So we're in phase 1 right now. We just release surveys to reach out to the public needed. Give 3 components in the first phase. First one is collecting data. That's traffic counts, that's the safety data that we have, other forms of information VDOT collects to analyze the situation. Another component is reaching out to public interactive online surveys. 2 were just released for projects in the northern section of the district yesterday. We're going to release the Barracks Road and Ivy surveys next week. The Ivy survey, or the Ivy process, is going to be slightly unique from the other 3. As you all know, we worked with the county on what's called triangle out solution that was sort of in that northwestern quadrant of the 250 bypass intersection. A lot of issues came out of that, a lot of citizen interaction, and so it was probably best to try and, on this particular one, just a little differently. We worked with Alabama County to set up what we call a focus group, and that group will be comprised of citizen representatives from neighborhoods and businesses that are in the corridor. We're trying to drive, as we're going through this process, especially phase one, it's kind of like, as we want to gather this data, gather the input from the public, gather input from staff, asking these folks towards the end of that first phase, did we get everything? You validate that this was what the set of concerns was, that we're talking about the problems, these are the problems you all experience that you recognize. Make sure that they, that we're really communicating well with the back corridor and the people within that. The other aspect of that particular corridor is VDOT's identified V-Trans, states V-Trans need really on 250 road itself and the interchange. But there's been a lot of discussion, part because of the triangle out, some of these zonings that have happened about multimodal opportunities, the lack thereof on lighting. So that's another component of this thing. We're hoping to kick off something this week, and then the next several weeks, trying to really make sure we understand fully, obviously we have a study area. Sort of asking 3 questions. Those are really, where are people wanting to go outside of the study area? Where are the major destinations? We're not necessarily thinking of Pantops or downtown, just to move so far away if it comes to a track, but Barracks Road, North Ground, Central Ground, Forest Head, those kind of things. We're not quite thinking on because the other multimodal component of this whole thing is the Three Notch Trail study that's coming up. So that's sort of in our mind, thinking about where people headed. The next component, next question is really making sure we understand what we're trying to link to, what is outside of the study area that's being proposed by the city or the county or PBA. It's still a little bit opaque, what are the planned facilities for multimodal in this area, this corridor outside of it, to help them to define that in context. And then the last part of the multimodal, really sort of thinking, it's east-west corridor, and you really only have 5 choices. You can either go on the north side of Old Ivy, you can go on the south side of Old Ivy, you can go on the north side of the railroad, you can go on the south side of the railroad, you can go on the south side of 250. And sort of think about those paths of like, what are the places where we're going to be problematic? You guys think it's coding seems red, yellow, green. Or what are the problematic areas we don't think we have an opportunity, or where are the opportunities that look good and then become green, and then sort of the yellow might be maybe something important, but expensive, or maybe difficult to do, and then trying to stitch that together into a mosaic of how we could actually bring people from one side of the board to the other. There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of hurdles. So hopefully out of that process, that will sort of wrap up phase one. I'll sort of better idea of what we want to do multimodal, have public input, and the input from the corridor focus group, and as well as the data that we'll be pulling for crash data and traffic stuff, something more behavioral in nature. We'll be doing a similar process, but a little bit lighter on the other 3 corridors, including Barracks Road. Obviously, Barracks Road is a question of how you maintain efficiency in the corridor, particular throughput. How do you increase safety at the same time, increase multimodal through the corridor? So we'll be looking at that. I won't say it's going to be somewhere, it won't, but it's not quite as complicated. Put it that way. I don't know, any other questions that you might have, is to try to outline that's where our process is for the next couple months. Again, as we move into phase 2, we'll be sort of, these preferred alternatives, or potential alternatives at the beginning of phase 2 will be through additional public input, through additional analysis, and other stuff turned into preferred alternatives towards the end of the year. And then hopefully that will be what leads to smart scale applications that we'll start working on next year in phase 3. Any questions?
So how are these potential changes to smart scale affecting how you go through this? Are you just gonna pick what the good projects will be regardless of how messed up the funding opportunities get and then figure it out later, or?
I think right now, I think at staff level, obviously we're following what's going on CTV. Our influence on that, what's happening with that is, we have some, but it's not, significant. And some of the issues that I'm hearing out of that process may or may not affect what we're talking about. And there were multiple things there, and I think CTV is looking at a whole wide range of things there. So, how that actually plays out, we'll have to see. One thing, we talk about the white head stuff, and to be honest, there has been something for the governor's office has been talked about on that, but, I think part of the problem is you still have the district grants, you still have locality, you can apply for a lot of that stuff. I think there's a push to try and make sure that some of the high priority funding is going to maintain some of the larger corridors of statewide significance and the connective tissue of things that stick together. And so making sure that those things get funded and making sure that, safety and congestion needs are being managed is, I think, part of the underlying thread in this whole, in that sort of quadrant of this debate. There's probably a lot of quality of applications and the number of applications. I think our district, we did a decent job managing them. I mean, our district is interesting, it's different than other districts in that we actually taking the applications that are coming in, and we're running pass them around because I think we really understood that we were getting kind of back the napkin kind of plans with very broad estimates, and we were getting, and we've seen that on our on-time performance in our district, it's pretty bad. And not just Charlottesville or Albemarle, it's some other localities. So we were trying to reach out to try and help develop better cost estimates. Other districts, we had about 38 in the last round. Other districts, we're talking like Richmond, had close to 100. And so it just becomes to the point where things being put in that aren't well vetted, well considered, and really the volumes coming through is becoming, I would say harder to find the right projects, but it starts to undermine the quality of application being submitted. So that's part of what's happening, funding, reduction in funding applications. And quite honestly, at a certain point, there may be some value in trying to prioritize what are the projects that are important. And I think I just close on that, but we've been talking about this sort of project selection process we've been working with, what we rolled out, capital revenue sharing project program, the last part, 4 steps in capital improvement. You have to do the planning at the outset, the back end, you have to think about how it's going to be maintained and who's going to maintain it. But in between, there's sections that we've not always done a great job at feed out our localities, our partners. And that, of course, the 3rd step is doing the engineering and construction, which is a big problem in this area. And the one I keep coming back to is project selection. That's picking the right project. And to do that, I think we have to have a planning process where we're prioritizing. Look, these are the projects we want to do in the next 3 to 5 years, and the planning process has to be sort of geared towards these are important projects, so that when these grants have to start, we're pulling from a stable of projects. For the small ones, like tap, medium size, like we're sharing, or larger on smart scale. And obviously, as requirements change, these funding programs in time, we need to be flexible and adapt to that. But the idea of really trying to figure out what projects do we want to work on in the next 3 to 5 years is so critical, as opposed to, hey, we got a grant round coming up. Let's look around and see what studies we might have sitting on the table, or what's political pressure at the moment. Being able to take a step back and really think about how we prioritize what biggest needs in our community is critical. And I think we do a better job of that.
Well, and also in terms of smart scale,
we have to align with what the state has defined as needs. And in this area, actually, Ivy and Barracks, safety and congestion are not the biggest need. It's multimodal improvements, transit, bike path. So making sure that we're developing projects that are needed and can perform well in smart scale, by, you know, the gaming system issue. We need to do that to some extent. And that will sort of determine how well we are performing in consideration of new changes. As long as we keep our eyes on the need.
I did have one question. So there was a recent, maybe you can talk about this. There was a recent change in a project that was approved. How does that happen? So, I mean, and I actually like the switch.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense, but what is the process that, I don't know if everybody's familiar with that, but.
I think you're speaking to is, we had it on the chart up there, it's the Peter Jefferson project got swapped out for the roundabout. Ultimately, the CTP makes decisions for projects. But give the staff recommended scenario that comes through, and then ranks cost benefit. In this case, I think there was a thought pattern that the District Avenue project, while it didn't rank as high, might have been a better project to advance, especially with some of the other investments that are being made in that area.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I think it was a good swap, but my understanding is the project were already approved by the
They were recommended for.
Oh, yeah, recommended, so those three were recommended.
Yeah, I mean, just remember, it's a lot of math goes into the thing, like cost and benefit analysis. That ranked the project. It was. So
Okay.
that's why it ranked the way it was and selected.
My misunderstanding, I thought it was already approved by the CTV, but it wasn't.
It was recommended.
They had gone, and then at the approval stage, that's when they made the switch.
As it transferred away from the staff and CTP, that's where the discussion started.
Yeah, I misunderstood that.
Which, I mean, quite honestly, that means that any project, in theory, could be pulled up, and I think it's good to have some of that flexibility in the system.
Well, in this case, I think that was.
Yeah.
So that was the May meeting where they made the final approval, and so it just got in before that.
June, wasn't it?
I think it just happened.
Yeah.
We found out about it about a week or two ago.
Well, I mean, it happened, well, we were actually talking about it in this meeting, I think, the last.
Well, we talked about like three that were, again, I thought they were already approved. The pretty smart scale, three, right?
No, they didn't make that change after the approval. They made it prior to CTV approving the projects.
Yeah, right.
Because it actually scored higher than the other one, but that pool of funding had run out. And so they went to the other pool of funding, and I think the CTV members' argument was that was actually a better project, let's fund that one instead. So I think that was at the recommendation of our CTV member.
Anything else on this item? All right, now we are on to federal grant updates.
Yes, I'll keep this very brief. If you have not already heard, we did not get, we're not successful in receiving a Raise Grant Award. There were 4 awards in the state of Virginia, I believe, and I think 3 of the 4 of them were projects that were either in a some sort of underserved community, so either historically disadvantaged or had a large percentage of underserved populations that were impacted by the project. So that does lead us to determine what our next steps might be related to the Ravenna Bridge. One of the benefits of applying through the RAISE program is that they do offer debriefs. So that's probably our immediate next step, is to be on the lookout for the debrief and be able to get feedback about our application to determine whether that may make sense for us to continue to pursue RAISE, but there could also be a larger conversation about what next steps might look like as far as pursuing that specific project. Related to the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, we are under contract. I think we don't yet know how to be reimbursed through that grant program, so that's probably our next administrative step. But as far as moving the project forward, we are under active procurement. We have received proposals for the project and are in the process of selecting consultants. There's a consultant selection committee that has been identified with representatives from all 6 of our jurisdictions that are serving on that. And so we're working to identify the consultant teams that we'll want to work with, and we should have those decisions made by the first week of August.
All right, any questions? Next roundtable.
A quick note that in previous pre-applications that we've submitted, we've definitely been told by USDOT staff that often it takes multiple submissions of the same application in order to be successful, and it could be the exact same application a year later. Sometimes it just takes getting in the queue because there are so many eligible projects that they're not approving projects that score very highly just because of the amount of money. So we'll learn from that debrief.
And we'll have like a feature to that. Very cool. All right, roundtable, MPO. Dates. In addition to what we just covered, okay, City of Charlottesville.
All right, so first off, we are working on our consolidated draft of the zoning code right now that will be revised by our consultant and then handed over to the planning commission. My other biggest news is that we have a bike type coordinator, Thomas Brennick. He will be working on our adoptive mobility hubs, so figuring out where our scooters should be parking, as well as looking at our bike parking around town, make sure that we have an up-to-date inventory and then come up with some sort of measurement of demand so we can figure out where to put more bike parking in the city. On transit, we have started our TSP, the Transit Strategic Plan. We have been doing public outreach recently on that, including 2 pop-ups at the downtown transit center and 1 city market. There's currently a survey out. If you look on CAT website, there should be a link to that. We're also going through our alternative fuel feasibility study. We just presented to council last night on our progress on the technical analysis. We'll be going to external stakeholders next to get their feedback on what sort of fuel cash we're using in the future. CAT is also rolling out bus shelters. We have a meeting, I believe, later today with DRPT. They are helping us come up with designs for bus shelters, specific locations around the city, as well as the county. I think we're a little bit ahead of the county and selecting our sites and moving forward with design. But we're looking at the initial designs, I think, this afternoon. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on our Safe Route to School program. We have developed our initial project list for this school year. Projects that we're going to put on the ground are tier 1 projects, which are going to be paint bollards, things that we can get out quickly in the next month and a half, should be getting sent over to public service for an order to put in lots of crosswalks and things like that next week or so. So you should start seeing a lot of public works activity on the ground, a lot of paint soon. We are going to be in the next phase expanding that list beyond what it is right now. Right now, it's just the public routes to school, the walking routes that are within the parent responsibility zone. The next step is expanding that to all the parent responsibility zones. And then the step after that is looking at bus stops outside of those parent responsibility zones and maybe put the bus stops safely and staying at the bus stops safely. So we're working through this project list right now. We're also going to be doing some outreach with local CBIL and COOP, which is Charlottesville United for Public Education, on August 10th. We'll have an event talking about how we're doing the Safe Route to School this school year. Lots of participation.
Then you also have the community.
Looking for another layer of law.
All right,
So tomorrow we are going to be board 2 items. One of them is for consent agenda to get the secondary picture plan, Royal West Road to be paved that approves of the and start doing that. And also, I believe the school will be giving an update on Route 20, Charity's Path Forward, kind of giving them the context of the project and also some of the designs we have from the consultants so far. Free bridge process, I believe that Parks and Rec right now is working to get cost estimates on the gate and stuff from their contractors. We can kind of figure out where to put them, as well as looking at the current right of way and the easements from different facts to see if we can figure out how to turn around somewhere without having to park more right of way. For Safe Routes to School, we just received the final report for Woodbrook Elementary, and I'm meeting with school and including Mike, I believe, on Thursday to kind of discuss some of the projects that we can hopefully get done, you know, in the near future to help these kids, and talk about some of the other recommendations from that. The priority process is still ongoing, in pushback because we're busy with everything. Green Notch, I believe, is going to enter the RP or RQ process. I believe now we're in the middle of that. And I think what else? I think that's pretty much it for now. And then of course doing the Ivy and Bears, is monitoring that as well. Participating, yeah. Well, I'm mostly just kind of watching Jessica and Kevin doing a lot of the meeting. I get to hear the update. But yeah, that's all for, and then I believe next planning commission meeting, we're gonna be discussing more about the 1844 updates as well. So that'll be listening on to like. That's it for county.
Great, Louise, anything to add? No. Pretty comprehensive, VDOT.
I think I covered most of it earlier.
Yeah, we don't have cat, got a little bit of that, Cleveland Jones. We don't have UVA, Roger.
Not too terribly much to report. This is an interesting time of year. We're finishing up one fiscal year and simultaneously starting another one. So we are just wrapping up some of our marketing initiatives that we have scheduled in FY23 that will be then put out in FY24. We did some fun video work and are going to have some additional photography so that we have a little bit of library to pull from when we go to use social media or do future marketing. We will be starting a strategic plan that is a requirement from DRPT. We have selected an agency and are in the process of refining the scope, the costs, and the contracts. So hopefully that will get all sorted out and everything in place by the end of this month so that we can start working on that in August. And that process will need to be fully adopted through the commission here at TJPDC and submitted to DRPT by November of 24. So we should be all set and on a good schedule to make sure that that happens. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thanks. And Ben, I know this is probably more of a worse question. Do we have any updates on any of the projects, the smart scale projects? Last fall they said some are supposed to go to bid this spring.
I think some of them are, it depends on which smart scale project. Honestly, we have a long list. Some of them, a lot of them are probably thinking of are acquisitions of all the streetscape projects that are a big smart scale project. A lot of them are in right away position, if not.
Okay.
So it doesn't seem like a lot's happening with them, but it's sort of behind the scenes sausage making.
Yep. All right.
Can you give Ms. Davidsky an opportunity from DRPT to go around the update? We should add her to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'll be a very brief update, but I do thank you for the opportunity. So just wanted to highlight that we made an announcement just about last month that we received an award through FTA's Bus and Bus Facilities program. So we are going to be able to replace 39 transit vehicles for 11 rural public transit agencies throughout the Commonwealth, which is a very, very much needed kind of replacement schedule for our buses. So this program for Bus and Bus Facilities, for those who don't know, it focuses on replacing, rehabilitating, and purchasing buses and related equipment, as well as constructing bus-related facilities. So that could be transfer centers or maintenance facilities. It's a very competitive program. So we are really excited that we were able to get any kind of award out of this cycle. So hopefully we'll be able to get those projects running. The other thing is just kind of a staffing note. So you might have seen him pop in. He had to pop back out, but we have hired 2 new statewide transit planners. That would be Mitch Huber and Paige Lazar. Likely you'll see them kind of shadowing me as well as others for those who may be on other MPOs or other meetings coming through. And we hope to have kind of any kind of new assignments or information about MPO representation from DRPT released within about September, October. So we're going to give them a little time to kind of get acclimated before I throw them to the wolves. But besides that, that's just my update, and I'd be glad to ask or answer any questions you may have.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. Any questions?
Tiffany, do we know where any of those 39 buses are going? Are
Yeah.
we getting any of those?
I actually, I think they're mostly 5311 recipients, so I'm not sure with you all if John had been in that group. So they were mostly for those agencies that we handle for 5311 funding in terms of operating. So I don't think that would be in your area necessarily.
Okay, thank you.
And is there anyone else I missed you'd like to give an update? All right, we'll go to closing matters from the public. Anyone from the public want to speak? Feel free to unmute. All right, anybody have any other matters?
Just an apology on behalf of TJPDP for the tech issues. We'll work those out. We need to start this meeting on time, so I'll do that.
Not our daily capital Linux computer get to make technology work just right. All right, well, I appreciate everyone being here and have a great day. You get to do.